You know, considering that TNA was basically just treating this show like a warm-up for Lockdown, Destination X actually turned out to be one of TNA's better pay-per-views in a while. It wasn't a classic pay-per-view for the ages or anything, but I just hoped that this was going to be a nice, solid show to set the stage for Lockdown, and that's what it was. It wasn't anything far beyond that, but for what it was, this was a good show. Um, there wasn't a single bad match in the whole pay-per-view. I mean, even the Fish Market Street fight that I thought was going to be a complete waste of time turned out better than I thought it would. I mean, sure, they went too far with it. I mean, the cupcake on a fishing pole bit was just stupid. It was way too cartoonish for me. But overall, I mean, this was a funny, entertaining comedy match, which was what the whole build-up was about in the first place. And if you were expecting a different type of match out of these four guys, then clearly you weren't paying attention for the last month. And then the Kaz Eric Young versus the Jobber Monsters match was decent. I mean, it wasn't great by any means, don't get me wrong, but before the show, I'd pegged this one as just just nothing but a bathroom break, and it actually turned out to be fairly watchable. I mean, first of all, Kaz carried most of the action in that match, and Black Rain didn't even really do that much, which is actually absolutely the right way to book something like this. And the live crowd was really into the Eric Young thing. I mean, I'm not crazy about it myself. It just seems kind of unnecessary. I mean, Eric Young's already super over without having to do the hurricane gimmick. But so I hope this was just a one-time thing. But anyway, the right team went over. The match itself was decent, and that's really all we could ask for out of this one. And then Petey Williams, Jay Lethal, which was easily the best X Division title match since Bound for Glory. And yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on there, but the interference in the actual match itself was kept to a minimum. And the stuff that happens outside the ring was great because it advanced two separate storylines. The Petey Steiner feud, which will definitely continue. Probably start fighting again when Petey wins the X Division title, maybe a Lockdown, maybe before Lockdown. And then the Lethal Dutt Val triangle. And Sanjay is getting more and more involved in this storyline now. Lethal and Val had that date coming up, so Sanjay turning on Lethal can't be that far off. And man, when those two start going at it, as long as SoCal Val doesn't get too heavily involved in the actual matches, man, that feud could be amazing. Those guys could have some incredible matches together. And then the opening match was great. The three-way tag bout. This was probably Rock and Rave Infection's best match as a tag team so far. And LAX really stood out too. I mean, Hernandez doing that dive to the outside never stops being impressive no matter how many times I see it. And don't get me wrong, I still think that the TNA are just complete morons for not trying to cash in on the Motor City Machine Guns' popularity right now. I really wish they'd gone over here, but I just can't bring myself to complain about the finish of this match when LAX went over, since those guys have been long overdue for a push toward the tag team titles. So LAX get the tag title shot at AJ and Tonko. So right there we have another great match announced for Lockdown. And then there was the women's match, which stole the show once again. Thought this was arguably the best match of the night. Told a really good story, how Gail and ODB were working really well together as long as Kong was on her feet. But as soon as Kong wasn't a factor, they turned on each other. And they even did this cool bit where Gail took a swig from ODB's flask and got grossed out. That was pretty funny, I thought. So Kong retains the title after Raisha Saeed interferes. That gives the babyfaces a case for a rematch, probably a Lockdown. I hope that's where they're going with it. I'm excited, and I'm excited to see what those three could do in a cage together. Maybe we might see one of them do the dive off the top of the cage like Gail did last year. That was a great moment. And after that, I kind of hope that they bring up some new faces to freshen up the title picture, so they don't run the well dry with this feud. I hope Roxy Laveau gets a shot at the title soon. I know she and Kong had a feud in Shimmer that was pretty highly regarded. I haven't seen those matches myself, but I've heard great things about them, so I'd like to see that happen soon, to see what they could do together. And then there was the six-man tag main event. Another very solid match, and considering that Kevin Nash was involved, that's really saying something, I think. I was kind of hoping the match would end with AJ Styles getting the pin on Nash, because I am not happy about him having to do the job to Nash on Impact. But this was a good way to end the match too. They needed to make Joe look strong going into his title match at Lockdown, and that's what they did. And they even had that great moment where Joe met Angle on the ramp, and they started going at it, which I loved. I mean, the build for their match at Lockdown has just been great so far. They announced that match weeks ago, and they've still got another month before the pay-per-view. They've got a lot of history to milk between Joe and Angle, and they've been laying the groundwork for this match with Joe's character since the night of the Scott Hall incident. So when they finally have the payoff for this thing, man, it's just going to be huge. And as for the rest of the pay-per-view, probably the worst match of the show was Booker T and Robert Roode, which is not to say it was terrible. I mean, it just wasn't all that memorable. I mean, I'm not really a big fan of strap matches. I never have been. I mean, they just seem to be like a pretty limiting concept to me. There's really only so much you can do in a match like that unless you get really, really creative. But this turned into a case just like with their match of Final Resolution, where the match itself, wasn't anything to really write home about, but the angle afterward made up for it. Rude got the win, which he needed, and then him and Ms. Banks got a ton of heat on Tracy when they lashed her with the belt. That was all very well done. Of course, Charmel came back. I was hoping that they'd keep her off TV permanently. I was probably hoping for too much. I think she's really annoying. I've said that before. I think Booker T works much better without her. But this made sense for the storyline. It sets up her and Booker getting revenge at Lockdown. I just wish they'd saved her return for Impact next Thursday, and then let Robert Roode and Ms. Banks have the spotlight at the end there. But overall, that angle was very good. As far as the Elevation X match is concerned, I don't know if there's a whole lot to say about it that hasn't been said elsewhere. James Storm cut a really awesome promo before the match, and that guy is so much more effective on the mic when he plays it serious like that. I'd like to see that continue. They had a nice brawl in the ring beforehand. They saved the scaffold stuff for the end, which was the right way to do it, I think. Storm ended up taking the dive off the top, and he went through a table, which was a pretty scary-looking spot. I mean, I heard there were no serious injuries coming out of the show, though, so it looks like he's all right. That's good. So that's good to know. As for the match itself, I don't know how effective the Elevation X concept is. I mean, I think the general feeling among the fans is that they just get so worried about the wrestlers falling off the X and getting killed that they can never really enjoy the match as much as TNA would like them to. But this is just a once-a-year match. It's not like it's not like we're getting these things every month. So it might not be the greatest thing ever. It might be too dangerous for the wrestlers, but it does make Destination X stand out from the other TNA pay-per-views, like the King of the Mountain match does for Slammiversary. So that's one merit that it does have. So anyway, that was Destination X. Definitely one of TNA's stronger efforts in the last few months, I think. My expectations weren't all that high going into this thing, but they delivered a solid show, and they had some very strong matches. And even the ones that weren't all that good, even the ones that weren't all that great, they still had some good things about them. So there wasn't anything that flat out sucked about the show either. It wasn't a fantastic outing or anything like that, or anything out of the ordinary. But I mean, as far as getting the ducks in a row for Lockdown is concerned, they did a solid job.